Alex Carter's heart pounded beneath the thin fabric of his diplomatic suit as he stood alone before the Galactic Council. The grand hall was overwhelming, its ceiling arching high above, framed by beams of glittering crystal. Rows of alien representatives glared down from tiered seats, their eyes, or whatever equivalent each species possessed, fixed on him with a mixture of amusement and contempt. It was hard to keep his gaze steady under their scrutiny, but he wasn't here for their approval. He was here to deliver a warning. A red hologram flickered to life beside him, a countdown glowing ominously in galactic standard. The numbers ticked down, silent and unyielding, a final testament to Earth's patience. Only minutes remained. Humans and their theatrics, Commander Drenna scoffed, her voice echoing across the hall. Her scaled skin shimmered under the council lights, a living display of superiority and scorn. As the head of the council's military division, she'd made her disdain for Earth clear from the moment he'd arrived. Do you truly think a timer will sway the council? We've seen your kind before, all bark and no bite. Alex met her gaze, his jaw set. He knew better than to rise to the taunts. Drenna wanted him rattled, humiliated. Instead, he steadied his voice. Commander, Earth's patience isn't infinite. This countdown is not a plea. It's a warning. Laughter rippled through the chamber, low and mocking, accompanied by whispers in languages he couldn't understand. To them, he was no more than an insect, an annoyance barely worth acknowledgement. But they didn't know Earth like he did. They hadn't witnessed the quiet resilience, the relentless ingenuity born out of necessity. He wasn't here to plead for mercy. He was here to state Earth's terms. If you continue this invasion, he continued, raising his voice over the din, Earth will respond. We don't seek war, but we will defend ourselves. Drenna's smirk widened, the ridges along her jaw pulsing with a rhythm that might have been laughter. Defend yourselves? With what, human? Rocks and sticks? A flicker of anger broke through Alex's calm, but he forced it down. We're not as helpless as you think, he replied evenly. Earth has developed its own defenses. You would do well to heed our warning. The chamber fell silent, his words echoing in the vast space. For a moment, he almost believed they might listen. Then, Drenna leaned forward, her eyes glinting with something dark and predatory. Enough of this nonsense. The Council has deemed Earth's integration into our empire necessary. You will surrender, or you will be subdued. Alex's fist clenched at his sides, but he kept his composure. You underestimate us, Commander. We may not have your fleet, but Earth has other ways of evening the odds. Empty words from an empty species, she sneered, turning away from him dismissively. Our fleet is already on its way to Earth. Whatever defenses you claim will be no match for the Council's technology. This resistance of yours will end in minutes. A shiver ran through him, though he held her gaze. He thought of the people back home, of Earth's last-ditch efforts, the gravitational disruption field, the technology they barely tested, barely understood. It was humanity's most desperate gambit, a leap of faith in science that could save them or destroy them. They'd been forced to take that gamble because of the Council's unyielding demands, its refusal to see them as anything other than prey. He took a slow, measured breath, willing himself to remain calm. If that's your final decision, Commander, then I have nothing more to say. But I urge you to remember this moment when you see what humanity is capable of. Drenna's gaze flicked back to the hologram, the red numbers now halfway through their countdown. She seemed unconcerned, perhaps amused, as though this warning from a lesser species was an entertaining sideshow rather than a credible threat. Her gaze returned to him, icy and unyielding. Your bravado is commendable, but it changes nothing. Silence hung heavy in the air. Alex could feel the weight of their disdain, the collective dismissal of his words, and the grim satisfaction that radiated from Drenna and her supporters. He knew that, to them, he was merely a messenger of a broken, foolish species clinging to false hope. But Earth was far from helpless, and he was here to ensure they understood that. As the countdown ticked closer to its end, he allowed himself one final look around the chamber. These beings saw themselves as rulers of the galaxy, untouchable, unstoppable. But Earth had learned to survive in ways they couldn't comprehend, had developed defenses no one expected. The Council had always seen humanity as primitive, weak. Soon they would learn just how wrong they were. The numbers continued to fall. 15 seconds. 10. He held his breath, steadying himself for the moment when Earth's response would begin, a moment that might just change everything. With 5 seconds left on the clock, Alex gave Drenna a final, unwavering look. "You've made a mistake, Commander," he said quietly. "And it's one Earth won't let you forget." The vast, silent expanse of space surrounded the Council fleet, its shimmering hulls glinting like a steel wall against the darkness. Inside her command center aboard the flagship Aurora, Commander Drenna leaned back in her chair, a thin smile tugging at her lips. Earth's warning had been laughable. This was just another species pretending to stand against the Council's authority, she thought, another pebble in the path of a galactic empire that spanned light years. "Status report," she commanded, her tone carrying an edge of amusement. The officers around her scrambled to respond, murmuring confirmations, all systems showing green. For a moment, she allowed herself the satisfaction of imagining the human diplomat's face when Earth realized the futility of their defiance. Then, a signal flickered on her screen, a strange reading, faint but persistent. "Lieutenant, explain this anomaly," she said, voice clipped. The young officer at the sensor console hesitated, his skin flushed a sickly shade under the command center's sterile lights. It appears to be some kind of gravitational interference, Commander," he stammered. "It's interfering with our forward shields and communication arrays." Drenna's eyes narrowed, a sliver of doubt slipping through her confidence. She leaned forward, studying the data with a growing sense of unease. The interference wasn't just an isolated glitch, it was spreading, cascading through their systems like a silent wave. She watched as numbers on her display shifted erratically, readouts failing one by one, their indicators flickering from green to amber, then to red. "What exactly am I looking at, Lieutenant?" she demanded, her voice sharper now, betraying a hint of the unease she felt. "Commander, this isn't natural. The disturbance is intensifying. It's as if space itself is twisting around us," he replied, his voice barely masking a tremor. It's affecting our entire fleet." A ripple of silence fell over the bridge, a charged, electric pause as the weight of his words settled. Drenna clenched her jaw, her mind racing to grasp the implications. The humans had said they'd defend themselves, but she'd assumed it was bluffing, a desperate posturing from a lesser race. Could they have truly developed something capable of challenging the Council's finest? As if in response to her silent question, a shudder ran through the Aurora. The deck beneath her feet seemed to hum, a low, ominous vibration that climbed up her legs and set her teeth on edge. "What is happening?" she hissed, gripping the armrests of her chair. "It's a disruption field, Commander," the lieutenant whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Our ships are being torn apart at the molecular level. The field is disassembling us." Panic sparked in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Order the fleet to pull back. Now!" Her voice cut through the chaos, a sharp command that jolted her officers into motion. Alarms blared, red lights flashing as her orders were relayed across the fleet. One by one, the ships began to turn, engines flaring as they attempted to escape the field's influence. But it was too late for some. Through the viewport, Drenna watched in horror as the lead ship, Vanguard, faltered mid-turn, its hull shimmering like liquid before collapsing inward, folding into itself as if crumpled by an invisible hand. It vanished in a flash, a silent implosion that left only debris and silence in its wake. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd expected Earth to resist, yes, but not like this. Not with a weapon that could bypass their shields, that could dismantle their ships with a precision that bordered on nightmarish. "Commander, incoming transmission from the human diplomat," one of the officers called, voice tight with fear. She nodded, swallowing back the taste of bile as Alex Carter's face filled the screen, his expression grim but unshaken. "Commander Drenna," he said, his voice low and measured. "We warned you." She glared at him, anger and fear warring in her chest. This is barbaric. Your kind barely grasps space travel, and yet you wield a weapon like this? Carter's gaze was unyielding, his tone devoid of triumph. Earth never wanted this. We wanted peace, to be left alone. But your council forced our hand. Cease this at once, she spat, desperation creeping into her voice. The council will not tolerate such an affront. We offered you a choice, Alex replied, his eyes hard as steel. This was never about conquest or power. It was survival. Earth has been left no other option. A tense silence hung between them, his words echoing in the vast emptiness that separated their ships. Drenna felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, a sinking realization that she had gravely underestimated these humans. They weren't the naive, primitive beings she'd imagined. They were strategists, survivors who had forged strength in secrecy. Commander, her lieutenant called out. We're losing more ships. The field, it's expanding. Drenna's breath hitched as she stared at the screen, watching the red icons of her fleet blink out one by one. Her grip on the armrests tightened until her knuckles turned white. She glanced back at Carter, words failing her for the first time. The countdown had ended. The bridge of the Aurora pulsed with tension as alarms blared, bathing the command center in a relentless red glow. Commander Drenna's eyes darted between screens, each flashing a new disaster. Fragments of her once mighty fleet drifted across the view screens, their icons blinking out one by one as ships disintegrated under Earth's gravitational disruption field. Her hands trembled, fingers hovering over the controls, but she willed them to stay steady. Panic was for those with options, and she had none. Report! Her voice cut through the chaos, barely concealing the edge of dread. Lieutenant Grell turned to face her, his expression grim. We've lost all forward vessels, Commander. Our systems, they're failing to counter the gravitational interference. It's spreading faster than we can retreat. She clenched her jaw, mind racing. She was supposed to be untouchable, her fleet an unstoppable symbol of the Council's dominance. Yet, here they were, reduced to ruins by a planet they hadn't deemed worthy of serious consideration. The human diplomat's face flickered across her mind, his calm warning echoing in her ears. We warned you. Shift all power to propulsion and get us out of the field's range, she ordered. Her voice, though steady, carried the weight of her desperation. If we can clear the interference, we may still be able to regroup. A murmur of acknowledgments swept through the bridge as officers scrambled to comply. The Aurora lurched forward, engines straining against the field's invisible grip. Outside, Drenna could see the scattered remains of the fleet twisting, pulled in different directions by the disruption field, their metallic hulls groaning under the pressure. For the first time in her career, she felt the chill of helplessness. The screen before her flickered, and Alex Carter's face reappeared calm as ever. The nerve of him, to remain so collected while her fleet crumbled. She glared at the image, a surge of anger flaring within her. Is this your idea of diplomacy, human? She snarled, her voice tinged with bitterness. You call this peace? Alex didn't flinch. His gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. We asked for peace, he replied softly, his voice devoid of malice. You chose war. Earth only responded in kind. Drenna swallowed, hating the unfamiliar weight of defeat pressing down on her. You think this victory will make your species safe? The Council will retaliate. This technology of yours won't protect you forever. Perhaps not, Alex admitted, his voice steady. But we've made it clear that Earth won't bow to threats. If the Council comes again, we'll be ready to defend ourselves once more. All we ask is to be left alone. His words hit harder than she expected. He wasn't gloating, wasn't reveling in their victory. He was simply stating facts, his calm conviction unwavering. And for the first time, Drenna found herself questioning the righteousness of the Council's crusade. Had they been too quick to assume superiority, too eager to subdue rather than understand? She forced herself to straighten, clinging to the last vestiges of her authority. If you believe this will end here, you're mistaken. The Council doesn't forgive insubordination. Alex's gaze softened, though his resolve remained. Then we'll defend ourselves as long as necessary. But know this, Commander, Earth isn't asking for power or dominion. All we seek is freedom. A silence stretched between them, heavy with the unspoken truths that lay beneath their words. Drenna's mind swirled with doubt, her certainty eroded by the unyielding reality that Earth had indeed forced their hand. Her pride screamed at her to argue, to assert the Council's dominance, but another part, a quieter, deeper part, recognized the futility of it. Earth had proven itself, not as a conqueror but as a resilient force that wouldn't be crushed. The ship's sensors jolted her from her thoughts. "Commander!" Grell called, his voice laced with alarm. "We're nearing the edge of the disruption field, but our propulsion is fluctuating. We might not make it out intact." She clenched her fists, teeth grinding. If they failed to escape the field, the Council would lose not only a fleet but its finest commander. The humiliation would be unbearable, and worse still, it would embolden Earth and other so-called lesser species. This could trigger an upheaval across Council-held territories. "Divert all remaining power to shields and engines," she barked, her tone brooking no argument. "Get us through, Lieutenant." The Aurora surged forward with a final, desperate burst of speed. The hull vibrated violently, groaning under the strain as the gravitational waves clawed at the ship, trying to tear it apart. Every creak, every shudder seemed to echo her own fears, yet she held her gaze on the distant stars, willing them to grow closer. Alex's image lingered on her screen, his eyes calm and unrelenting. "This is your chance to leave peacefully, Commander. Take it, before more lives are lost." For a fleeting moment, Drenna wanted to respond, to tell him that perhaps they would consider his terms, that this bloodshed wasn't necessary. But her pride held her back, binding her to the silence. The Aurora broke free of the field's grip, its engines roaring as it propelled them into safe space. Drenna released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, yet the relief was hollow, tainted by the knowledge of the fleet she'd left behind. As the Aurora stabilized beyond the reach of Earth's disruption field, the battered crew on the bridge began to regroup, casting furtive glances at Commander Drenna. The silence was thick, a palpable weight pressing down on each of them. Drenna sat motionless in her command chair, her gaze fixed on the debris-strewn expanse of space that had once been her fleet. The hum of the ship's systems was all that filled the void, but it did nothing to drown the bitter truth echoing in her mind: she had underestimated them. She had underestimated Earth. The comms console beeped, shattering the silence, and a fresh message from the Council Command appeared on the screen. Drenna hesitated before accepting, bracing herself for the inevitable reprimand. The holographic figure of High Counselor Varix materialized, his reptilian eyes narrowed with barely concealed fury. "Commander Drenna," Varix began, his voice cold as interstellar ice. "Your failure to subdue a lesser species has cost us dearly. Do you grasp the severity of this disgrace?" Her pride flared at the accusation, but she swallowed her retort, bowing her head instead. "I understand, High Counselor. Earth's defenses, they were beyond anything we anticipated. Their disruption technology bypassed our shields. Our ships disassembled under its power." Varix's expression darkened further. "And yet you still speak as though it were an accident, as though Earth could have achieved this without planning. They are clearly more dangerous than we believed, and now they are emboldened by your failure." Drenna's jaw tightened, and she forced herself to respond calmly. "Perhaps, High Counselor, we should reconsider our approach. Earth does not seek conquest or territory. They have asked only for peace and independence. Another attempt to subjugate them may only end in further loss." Varix's eyes narrowed, his forked tongue flicking in distaste. "You suggest we negotiate with those who defied us?" "Commander, the Council does not negotiate with primitives." A flicker of frustration ignited in her chest, but she held it back. "High Counselor, these primitives have proven they can dismantle our fleet. A show of force may only deepen their resolve. They are not interested in conquest, they merely wish to be left alone." Varix's gaze hardened, clearly unimpressed by her plea. "And you believe surrendering to this rebellion will not inspire others to follow suit? One spark of defiance could spread to every corner of our territories. We cannot allow such weakness. The transmission ended abruptly, and Drenna's shoulders slumped. Varix's refusal to recognize Earth's strength, to see them as anything more than pests, filled her with a hollow dread. She understood now that the Council's pride would doom them to repeat this mistake, to drive Earth, and perhaps others, to defend their autonomy at any cost. A soft chime broke her reverie, and Alex Carter's image reappeared on the screen. His calm, steady gaze met hers, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of respect rather than disdain. "Commander," Alex began, his tone gentle but firm. "I don't need to know what your council has told you, but Earth's position remains unchanged. We seek no war with you or anyone else. But we will not yield." Drenna took a deep breath, the weight of her failure settling into a grim acceptance. "You've proven yourself a formidable adversary, Carter," she admitted, her tone devoid of the condescension that had laced their earlier exchanges. "Your people have shown strength I did not expect. I underestimated you." Alex's gaze softened, and he nodded in acknowledgement. "Our strength isn't in our technology, Commander. It's in our resolve to protect our own. Earth has learned the cost of freedom, and we won't surrender it." The words struck a chord she hadn't anticipated. She saw in his eyes not the gloating of a victor, but the quiet determination of someone who would rather avoid bloodshed than revel in it. Her own pride seemed insignificant in the face of his conviction. "Perhaps one day, the Council will understand that," she replied, her voice a murmur more to herself than to him. "Perhaps this conflict can end without further loss." The faintest hint of a smile appeared on Alex's face, though his tone remained serious. "That's our hope. And we'll be ready, should that day come." The transmission ended, leaving Drenna alone with her thoughts. The bridge crew waited in silence, watching as she straightened, her mind churning with an unfamiliar mixture of regret and respect. She rose from her chair, her gaze sweeping over her crew, and the weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. "Prepare for departure," she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. "We return to the Council, and prepare for whatever may come." As the Aurora turned away from Earth, her thoughts drifted to the planet that had humbled her, a place she'd dismissed as primitive but had found itself woven into her memory. Earth had defied her, not with malice or arrogance, but with an unyielding will to survive. In that moment, she understood the strength that lay within their fragile, determined species. A final glance at the blue orb on the viewscreen filled her with a quiet resolve. She would return to the Council, bearing not only the scars of defeat but a warning, one they could choose to ignore at their peril.